Hello, community. Hello, beauties. Today, I want to talk about being spiritual and being human. It is something that is a big part of my experience, and I've been wanting to talk about it for quite some time. And now it feels like something that's being integrated. And I want to share it now because I noticed that a lot of us are going into like the spiritual healing journey who aren't necessarily like the quote unquote whatever spiritual stereotype you have, like barefoot, vegan, like only doing yoga all the time. And I've heard a lot of comments or rather questions asking me, how to navigate the two. Because if you don't know me personally, I live in Hong Kong. I live in this big city, but of course, also spirituality and like the growth and healing journey is such a big part of me. So I do get questions from time to time about how I navigate this. I would say I can't even remember how many years ago I started my spiritual journey, but I remember in the beginning, I made it my whole personality. Like I stopped making my nails because it wasn't spiritual. I remember one of my friends at the time asked me what songs or music do I listen to, and I told her, "Oh, I only listen to frequency music." And I meant it. We joked about it many years later, but at the time I really was like, I only listen to, not that I don't listen to frequency music anymore, but I listen to Taylor Swift, I listen to this and that. Yeah. And, anyways, I made spirituality my whole personality, and it really, really peaked when I moved to Bali for a year. It was a magical year. I often describe that as my spiritual Disneyland phase that I have no regrets about. I tried so many things, and I was deep in the spiritual hippie jungle, vibe. I'll tell you all about it in a moment, but no regrets. I loved it. And I believe that that full, deep, 100% immersion journey was exactly what I needed to accelerate kind of my growth and my healing journey. And then at some point, that was also no longer needed. And I felt a strong calling to come back to, for lack of better term, real life. Not that that wasn't real life, but you know what I mean. And that's when I moved back to Hong Kong and started this integration life. So let's get into it. So I moved to Bali for around a year and I went all in. I will spare you the nitty gritty details, but I was like, I would have Kundalini awakening for breakfast and then cacao ceremony for lunch, and then have deep conversation with people about God for like 5 hours, and eye gaze with every stranger and hold their hands and love them unconditionally, and then have some plant medicine and see God and do this and integrate. And I loved it. But I also know that that phase isn't meant to last forever. I wasn't as aware of it when I was in it, which is, I think, completely understandable. But after some time, I realized that that phase isn't meant to last forever. I remember toward the kind of tail end of my Bali journey, there was one specific moment that I'm like, wow, I'm in this spiritual Disneyland, but something is also quite off. I hope I'm not offending anyone. This is purely my own experience, but I started almost noticing people who can't leave. It was on the dance floor. I danced a lot, as do all spiritual people. I remember arriving late. So when I had arrived, they had already started the dance. And there were all these people dancing very intimately together, very spiritual, very present, and very tantric, very goddess like. But all I felt energetically, I mean, physically, it was a beautiful visual. All I felt energetically was that I was staring at a bunch of energetic zombies. And again, this is not to shame anyone, purely my own experience that was meant for me. But I remember feeling like the energy was, let me have more. Let me have more of this sensuality. Let me have more of this ecstasy. You know, people were yelling and screaming and rolling on the floor. Like, let me have more personal expression and authenticity. Let me take up more space because that's what spiritual people do. And there was a lot of, just people moving in, like grabbing onto each other like energetic zombies, in a sense that it wasn't enough. Like, no matter how much joy, how much sensuality, how much presence, it wasn't enough. And I don't know what about that moment, but something about that moment just made me realize I can't really stay here anymore. I'm kind of peaking to that point. And then the days that followed, I noticed a lot of different loops. So for example, I kept doing the same thing, right? That was very joy filled, but also not as fulfilling as I would hope my days to be, if that makes sense. So I had a lot, endless conversations about spirituality and God. And a lot of people are like, yeah, this is why we need to stay here. We need to have love, which is all true. But I just noticed that the conversations were looping without really meaning anything. Like, there wasn't anything that really came out of it apart from I felt really good in that moment, which you could argue would be the purpose, which is possibly true as well. But I also noticed that all my days were filled with such like ecstasy like joy that I started getting tired of it. So by like, I think the 10th month or something, I had friends visiting and I was bringing them around. And compared to say like the first 2 months when I had friends visit, I noticed that there were these amazing things that were surrounding us, beautiful vegan food, amazing spiritual community, all these healing modalities and classes and workshops you could go to. And there was just no spark in me. I was like, yeah, and then you could do this. And then we do have a dance every Sunday and you can join and this and that. And at some point, I noticed that these loops, I was doing and living the same life over and over and over again, like a never-ending music festival. And at some point, I just thought that, yeah, we would have to leave the theme park and kind of return to real life. This truth is very nuanced, but I do think that for some people, it is hard to leave, because it feels so good to be in spiritual Disneyland. And also another layer is we fear that if we leave this, we won't be able to recreate that in our life. And so we would rather stay in that loop and keep repeating what feels like joy in that moment. But from what I know, a lot of these people who are having, the deepest conversation, the deepest experience, might be completely broke. They might have a lot of their own issues that they're not looking at, and which to me isn't the most healthy balance of life. For me, it deeply felt like I wanted to translate all that I felt and experienced, which was invaluable, into real life, into what was my purpose, to share it back to my world. And not just on this kind of self-fulfilling joy loop, if that makes sense. Here is the nuance though. I deeply believe that some people are meant to be the gatekeepers of this higher vibrational realm and plane of this world. They are meant to maybe live in the forest and focus on their practice, or maybe being deeply in joy and hold that frequency, that vibrational pillar to overall support humanity in elevating our consciousness. I deeply believe in that. Some people, though, are meant to experience whatever and everything that they've experienced in this world, joy, purpose, clarity, love, and then bring it back to their world to create that necessary ripple effect that overall, again, supports humanity and our consciousness. And I'm one of those people. So in the beginning of my journey, I promised Mama Bali that I asked her to give me all the experience she could possibly give me for my journey and my path. And when that experience comes to an end, when there's no longer anything to learn that is meant for me, I promise that I will not cling on to her and that I will hear the calling and leave. Fast forward around a year later, one day in meditation in my beautiful home, I heard the message. And even though a big part of me wanted to stay there, you know, I wanted to drink cacao and dance every day, I booked my flights for the next week and I came home to Hong Kong.
Hello from Airport Lounge. It is around 6 a.m. Been up since around 4.
Apart from the feeling that if I didn't leave then, I wouldn't be able to leave and I would cling and somehow Bali would kick me out of her beautiful land, there was also this deeper feeling that I have had enough of the experience, I know enough, and now it is my duty to bring all that I've experienced back to the place that I was raised, to the people who might not have the privilege that I had to just move somewhere, right, and experience this beautiful journey, to bring that frequency to them to create that ripple effect that I spoke to earlier. So after I returned back to Hong Kong, I immediately picked up on hosting Women's Circle. I think I might have been like on the flight when I created that event poster. Creating Women's Circle at the time and working on one-on-one, building my website and da-da-da-da-da. Of course, also talking a lot about all that I've experienced. And a lot of my friends are like, no way, that's possible. And I was like, yes. So even in sharing my stories, I knew that I was already creating that ripple effect that I wanted to create. And life was harder. It was so hard to integrate back to my real world. I remember thinking, why aren't people smiling at me? Why are people walking so fast? Like, where's the nature? It was just so hard. But I knew deep in my heart that that was the right call. And I know that integrating the spiritual and human life is forever going to be an experience. And sometimes we kind of topple over more to one side than the other, kind of like a seesaw. But if I'm being honest, I kind of like that because it takes a lot of our own awareness and our own practice to catch ourselves. And sometimes we need to be a bit more human, also just allow ourselves to live in this physical experience. And sometimes when we're too far off that path, I like to catch myself with awareness and bring myself back to my connection to source. And when I'm too deep in that, I've forgotten what it's like to be a living, breathing human, then I bring myself back. And again, it's forever going to be an experience, a seesaw experience and an integration. And maybe that's also what's fun about it. And more often than not, I contemplate how can I be both really spiritual and divine and also really grounded and human. Because I'm in such a diverse place right now, there's so many different practice grounds. Like, how can I stay in my heart when maybe my ego wants to throw a tantrum? Or how do I stay in my own pace, walking down the busiest street during lunch hour without getting annoyed that people are rushing to work? And there's so many things that I can practice in this big city. Sometimes I practice non-duality. Sometimes I practice presence. Sometimes I practice whatever it is. There's just so many things to practice. All in all, I guess the message I want to share is if you're in a phase of life that you're considering going all in on spirituality, I've heard a lot of people tell me they feel like they're going on a retreat, they want to move to Bali, they want to quit their job and do a training. If that feels true to you, go for it. At the same time, if you're feeling the pull to integrate, like you don't want to be so away from your known world, you want to practice Zen Buddhism, you want to do like a day retreat in the country that you grew up in, like that's okay too. For me, both paths are valid and sacred, and the key really is learning to hold both in your heart and knowing that it's not going to be perfect, absolutely not, but in any way that you can bring depth to your already existing life, I think you're doing pretty well. So thank you for tuning into this video. If you resonate with the message, with these words, feel free to let me know in the comments, like, subscribe, do anything that you feel true to you and correct to you. And I'll see you next week.